Many countries are, well, they're preventing the phase out of fossil fuels for one reason: massive, massive losses. When I say losses, I don't mean losses in terms of investments or losses to that country in particular, but losses in terms of being sued by fossil fuel companies. Fossil fuel companies have a history of suing governments for many billions of dollars once they try to shut down parts of loss making businesses in the fossil fuel sector. This is far worse than what we previously realized, and here are the details. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the channel. I'm Sam Evans. You're watching the Electric Viking. If you'd like to become a member of the channel, that'd be great. I'll put a link in the description below. That does help me to get more videos out about this kind of information, showing you what governments are facing in terms of the fossil fuel empire. The empire is, in my opinion, it's very similar to the empire from Star Wars. Basically the evil empire that really has its roots in all countries across the planet. The Guardian says that fear of billion-dollar lawsuits is stopping countries from phasing out fossil fuels. And it's not some ethereal threat. This is very real. And it's based in precedent. Companies can sue governments for closing oil fields and mines, and the risk of huge damages is stopping countries from passing green laws. In the mountains of Transylvania, a Canadian company makes plans for a vast gold and silver mine. The proposal, which involves raising 4 mountaintops, sparks a national outcry, and the Romanian government pulls its support for the project. After protests from local communities, the Italian government bans drilling for oil within 12 miles of its shoreline. A UK fossil fuel firm has to dismantle its oil field. Beneath the grey whales and sea turtles of Mexico's Gulf, an underwater exploration company gets a permit to explore a huge phosphate deposit. Before it can begin, Mexico withdraws the permit, saying the ecosystem is a national treasure that could be threatened by the mining, and decides it's actually a terrible idea. These cases are part of the bread and butter of governments, updating environmental laws or responding to pressure from voters. But every time, the company involved sued the government for lost profits, and, well, they almost always win. Romania won in its case, but Italy and Mexico were forced to pay billions of dollars. They were among more than 1,400 cases analysed by The Guardian from within the Investor State Dispute Settlement (ISDS) system, a set of private courts in which companies can sue countries for billions of dollars. There have been long-held concerns about ISDS creating regulatory chill, where governments are just scared out of their minds of actual action on nature loss and the climate crisis by legal risks. Very exclusive event here in Newcastle. Saturday, the 15th of March from 3 to 5 p.m. I'll be speaking here with just a couple of other speakers. Very small event. So you can meet me in person. You can actually have a look at my EV as well, the Xpeng G6. Test that out. I'll put a link in the description below to the event. I believe that the tickets will probably sell out very, very quickly. So if you're from Sydney, from Brisbane, from Newcastle, make sure you click on that link as quickly as possible to get in. I think there's only around 30 tickets left at this point in time. I'll put that link in the description and I'll see you there. Now, government ministers from a range of countries have confirmed to The Guardian that this chilling is already in effect, and that fear of lawsuits from these companies is shaping environmental laws and regulations. These fossil fuel companies have far more power than most people actually realize. In April 2018, New Zealand banned new offshore oil exploration projects, but stopped short of an outright ban or revoking existing concessions. James Shaw, who was climate minister at the time, said it was because of the risk of being sued by foreign oil and gas companies. When we implemented the ban on offshore oil and gas exploration, we had to construct that incredibly carefully in order to avoid the risk of litigation. The way that we did that was to leave existing permits in place. As a result, New Zealand was unable to be a full member of the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. Shaw said the implications were discussed around the cabinet table, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and trade, pushing back on environment policies and frequently talking about the risk that we would end up in litigation. We could see what was happening around the world, he said. We'd keep track of the number of lawsuits that were being taken and what percentage of those were essentially hostile to environmental regulation. Toby Landor, who has been a leading arbitration lawyer for 30 years, said acting in accordance with the Paris Agreement could result in very significant claims for countries. In other words, if you signed up to the Paris Accords, well, good chance fossil fuel companies will sue you to the tune of billions of dollars. He said it matters hugely because of the climate emergency that we are in. We've got an imperative under the Paris Agreement to act quickly and decisively. The idea that this does not create a chilling effect is an outdated and inaccurate view, he said. My impression from working closely with governments is that ISDS is now increasingly on their radar. That is, it's an increasingly big issue for them to consider. Whether implementing a particular policy might give rise to claims. We're left with two regimes that conflict. The Paris Agreement requires broadly that fossil fuels be phased out, and the ISDS regime provides guarantees for investors that protect their investment. Even if it is a fossil fuel investment, that's the conflict. It's as simple as that. International arbitration costs a lot of money, says Manuel Diaz-Galeas, Attorney General of Honduras, which is fighting cases against them, claiming 18 billion US dollars, greater than the country's entire annual budget. The thousands of millions of dollars claimed in compensation is simply absurd, he said. Diaz-Galeas adds that the effects of ISDS claims are particularly significant for countries such as Honduras, with high poverty rates and very limited budgets. Rob Davies, who was Minister of Trade and Industry of South Africa from 2009 to 2019, withdrew the country from a number of treaties with ISDS clauses from 2013 onwards. He says that ISDS posed a huge risk to the government's legislation. Companies have got the right to challenge any policy that will impact their expectation of profitability in the future. No matter what the regulation is, no matter what its motivations are, no matter how designed it is, or anything, he said. Davies believes that more recently fossil fuel companies are using the ISDS provisions to thwart regulations on green transition intentionally to slow down the world's move away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. He says it has a chilling effect, particularly on developing countries that don't have the power to fight these lawsuits. In 2021, the International Energy Agency released a report saying the 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway requires no new oil, gas, or coal. But the issue of regulatory chill has been acknowledged by a number of international bodies, including the 2022 IPCC report on climate change. Numerous scholars have pointed to the ISDS to be able to be used by fossil fuel companies to block national legislation aimed at phasing out the use of their assets. The authors said the UN Council of Europe and European Parliament have all raised concerns about climate action being blocked, delayed, or watered down by this powerful court, the ISDS. There can be astronomical costs associated with these cases, says Kyla Tinhara, an associate professor at the School of Environmental Studies at Queen's University in Canada. Countries are afraid of implementing environmentally friendly policies because they can't afford the cost of these lawsuits. Governments don't even have the funding to deal with the case in the first place. The Guardian investigation into ISDS reveals $84 billion in payouts from governments to fossil fuel companies. $84 billion. More than $120 billion of public money has been awarded to private investors across all industries since 1976. The average payout for a fossil fuel claim was $1.2 billion. Some cases can cost countries a huge portion of their total annual budget, potentially plunging that country into recession or even a depression. For example, in 2015, Occidental Petroleum received a $1.1 billion payout from the Ecuadorian government. The country's budget was only $29 billion in 2016. Honduras faces 11 claims, with one seeking damages equal to 30% of the country's entire GDP. The problem is increasingly being discussed by climate ministers and heads of state. On the campaign trail in 2020, US presidential candidate Joe Biden said he opposed ISDS clauses in trade agreements because they allow private corporations to attack labor, health, and environmental policies. Last March, Ireland's former president, Mary Robins, said there was a growing number of claims brought by fossil fuel companies against governments wanting to take action to tackle climate emergency, claiming fossil fuel companies were seeking massive financial compensation from states that decided to tackle the nature and climate crisis. I cannot overstate just how perverse this is, she said. It's sickening. The Danish government set a deadline to stop fossil fuel exploration by 2050, as opposed to 2030 or 2040, because it would have had to pay incredibly expensive compensation to companies on top of lost revenue for the Treasury, the then Climate Minister Dan Jorgensen said. A 2023 UN report by David Boyd, the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, found Denmark, New Zealand, and France had limited their climate policies simply because of the threat of lawsuits from the ISDS, with the Spanish government saying it has slowed its transition away from fossil fuels over fear of being sued by foreign investors. The report stated that this threat has become a major obstacle for countries addressing the climate crisis.